Hello, my name is Andrew Bennett. I am a MLIS student at East Carolina University, and this is my presentation on the why and how of diversity audits. I'm going to go through kind of why it's so important, the various forms of diversity audits, as well as kind of what they can look like. And then finally, we're going to get into some of the traps you can run into when trying to increase your diversity in your library that perhaps are not as useful as you would like them to be. While doing research on diversity audits, the same metaphors came up time and time again, and they all can be traced back to Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, whose work Mirrors, Windows, and Sliding Glass Doors really helped create the language around why diversity audits are so important. There's a couple of quotes here from the work. One of them is when children cannot find themselves reflected in the books they read, or when the image they see are distorted, negative, or laughable, they learn a powerful lesson about how they are devalued in the society of which they are part. I'm going to talk a little more about this on the next slide. Now, here we've got two infographics from the Cooperative Children's Book Center at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and they kind of expand on that mirrors and windows analogy. These are from 2015 and 2018, and if you're looking at the numbers, you will see there has been progress made, but not as clear-cut as one might like. When you're looking at white readers, they're going to see themselves in 2018, 50% of books, and that's just kind of they're reflected everywhere. Everywhere they look, they're going to be able to find books about themselves, and that's great. But they also need to be able to see into the lives of other people and get to see them as whole and complete people. And if they pick up a book and it's not a white person in 2018, they were more likely to see a fun little bear or a beaver or something going through an adventure, and that's great and that's fun, but there shouldn't be, or at least one could argue there shouldn't be more books about main animal characters than all Black, Indigenous, and people of color combined. And it's the analogy of the mirrors and the windows and sliding glass doors is a great one because while it's great for white people that they get to see themselves in books and see themselves going through adventures, everyone else deserves the same right. And when you're going through and you're picking up 1 out of every 20 for Latinx or 1 out of every 100 for Native Americans, then you're not going to get to see yourself in more than a handful of situations going through various adventures and troubles and everything that life has to offer. And it's so important that these books are findable, that they are scattered throughout the library in every single section, not just, of course, the children's sections and the picture books and the easy to read, but into the juveniles and the adult fiction and the nonfiction and everything else. And this when you're looking at the trends and you're saying, okay, all the numbers are going up a little bit, but mostly what they're doing is they're reducing the books featuring white main characters, and they're putting them into animals and others. So there is some progress, but there's a lot further to go. So let's dig a little bit more into the why of auditing. And of course, diversity, equity, and inclusion are important enough to be a priority. But one of the things you need is you need numbers, you need statistics, you need data so that you can kind of know where you are so you can figure out where you're going. If you assume that you're doing a good job, if you assume you're doing a bad job, even if you're thinking, okay, what we really want to focus on getting more diversity in our books, that doesn't mean you're not going to end up with blind spots. It doesn't mean that you're not going to end up really missing out on a large section of books that you need, whether it's books featuring African American characters or dealing with socioeconomic struggles, homelessness, various issues. We'll get to that a little bit more later. But figuring out your blind spots, establishing short-term and long-term goals are much harder to do if you don't have data that kind of shows where you're at currently. So let's look a little bit into what you can look for in an audit. There's lots and lots of different things. There's the really kind of simple, different diverse representation and own voices, which we'll get into a little bit more later. But then there's things like disability, LGBTQ plus, culture and religion, but also mental health, illness. There's lots of different things, and figuring out how you're going to find those books, figuring out how you're going to keep track of those books, figuring out how you're going to help those who are looking for those books is really, really important in order to serve your community to the fullest. Let's look a little into the different types of diversity audits. There's four main ones we're going to get into today: total or department audits, sectional audits, reverse audits, and order audits. Now, we're going to start with total or department audits. This involves reviewing each book individually. It's very time consuming, but it is going to give a very, very complete picture of your library. For many different things, it is not going to be an efficient use of your time, if even possible. But for some things, you can do it a lot easier. Also, if you have a smaller department, of course, you can do that. Or if you're just long term, you can start when you're shelf reading, going through and trying to, over the course of 5 or 10 years, as books leave, as books join, you could end up doing a total audit. But one of the things, if you have your MARC records set up, if you have some way to search and find every single book that's featuring a LGBTQ main character, then you can take all that, just divide it by the number of books in your collection, and kind of figure out the math there. So it is possible. Figuring out other things, of course, is going to be much, much more difficult and not practical. Now we're going to do something that's very similar to the department audits, but is a lot more practical. This is a sectional audits. This is when you're doing sections or slices of your total inventory. Of course, that's going to save a lot of time, but it's going to give snapshots, and it helps establish kind of where you're at. Of course, there's various issues. If you're just doing it alphabetically and you run into someone like James Patterson and you're doing 200 books, let's say, and let's say he's got 20 of them, then that's really going to skew the statistics. So you could do it by individual author, so that but then, of course, you have a chance of missing books that they have that he's written that does feature a LGBTQ character. So that it's certainly how you do it can add some complexity to how good the information is. But it is a good way to start. Just kind of getting baseline numbers. It also means you can do it section by section. Like, let's say you want to make sure every month you do a 200 book section. Over time, that's going to add up, and every single time you do it, your numbers are going to get a little bit more accurate to where you're at. Now, as far as the most time efficient version of all these audits is the reverse audit. What you're going to do is go and find some award-winning books. You can go get a Stonewall list, a Rainbow list, or whatever awards that you believe are a good representation of individual honors. Get those books and then look up how many of last year's winners can be found in your catalog, and you can go back and do the year before that, the year before that, the year before that, and you start realizing, all right, at least we're getting the really, really good books, or wow, we are missing even the award-winning books, even like the most prized and acclaimed books we're missing. And of course, if you're already using the Stonewall list to order off of, it's going to be less helpful. But there's always another award list out there for you to look at and start to figure out if those books are also on your list. And of course, if you start ordering those, then at the very least you're going to be adding in that diversity to your collection. Now, I know a lot of people who are doing these are not going to have an overabundance of time, so I do want to present these order audits. I think they're the best solution for someone who just doesn't really feel like their library or department has the time to go back in time and try to figure out the job they've done in the past. You got order audits, and that's where you are just going to kind of create a goal for yourself. We want to have 20% of our books this year feature African American characters written by African American authors, because that's similar to our local statistics. Whatever you're aiming for, you start keeping up with each order, so that you've got that list there. You know what you've ordered this year, which features various whatever diversity you're interested in tracking. And then over the course of the year, you'll figure out what you ordered this year, how your library changed over the course of the year, and you can see what you were missing as you're going along. And if you have a month or two where you're really like, wow, we had no books with featuring LGBTQ characters, we really need to fix that on month 3 and really need to go find, maybe it's a rainbow list. You go find that list and you start adding more of those to your orders, so you're getting instant feedback about what you're doing, and you're over time building up an audit that would reflect more and more of your library, and it requires no kind of back work, no kind of going back and redoing your entire collection and figuring out all of that. I think that everyone wishes they could just easily do a diversity audit by putting in, a Library of Congress subject heading and have it come back with great information, and that's just simply not going to happen. You can do some good stuff by looking up feminism or gender, sexuality, and you'll get some good hits back, and you'll probably get some good books. But when you're looking for other books, it can end up being a really mixed bag. You can still have to look for minorities or Indians of North America, um, and they're really scattered. And I think one of the key things, just like with the order audits, in order to make things easier going forward, is to setting up, um, using the same Library of Congress subject headings for your books as they're being ordered, in order to make diversity audits in the future um, much easier to do, and to do things like tagging gender and sexuality and race and class, anything that's coming up in a book, any subject in a book, that you can save for later use, for either for diversity audits or for creating book lists for people. It's just really important to make sure you're doing that every single time. All right, I just want to dig a little bit into kind of the census of Burlington. 57.8% white, 27.7% Black or African American, 17.8% Hispanic or Latino. Of course, I don't think that is what is reflected currently throughout all of the shelves, and that's a lot of that is just what you can order. That's going to be an issue because, and we'll go into a little bit later. But what books are available have historically featured, the vast majority of them have been white characters, so I think it's really important to at least make sure that you're doing the best you can to get close to those numbers. And I think as you build more and more books that feature Black or African American characters, you're going to end up with more and more patrons that identify those races. And of course, you got a 2.9% that are 2 or more races, which is in no way reflective of people's actual like genetic makeup, but it is reflected more in the one drop rule that's left a horrific legacy throughout the American history, where kind of people are assimilated into one race at any given time. Um, and I think that having more books that kind of celebrate that would be really useful for people to feel like they are 2 or more races, and also just kind of having that be more acceptable. That's kind of a bigger than a library thing. Like, you can't just solve that, but you can certainly feature books that recognize that most people are 2 or more races, and feature those books prominently. And you can at least be some small part of the solution. Now, what can a diversity audit look like? They can really look like anything, and I've got 2 very different ones right here to look at. The first one is just a quick diversity audit looking for Black, Indigenous, people of color authors, and then that are writing in their own voice. So you could breeze through that one pretty quickly. You could do fairly large sections to try to get a good idea of the numbers of your library. And then at the bottom, we have a much more detailed audit that was created by Kelsey Bogan that goes into whether they're Muslim or Jewish, whether they're going through socioeconomic problems or homelessness, where they adopted, does it deal with LGBTQIA issues or plus size issues, as well as breaking down various different races for the authors and main characters on a much more detailed level. And now that could be great for creating book lists in the future, or doing a diversity audit for a small section, or doing it piecemeal over time, just trying to help you create things like book lists that would be a resource for your library and for people who are looking for those type books. But it's not a very easy thing to do for a large collection. Now, of course, diversity is complicated. It's always going to be political and local. Each individual library within an individual county is going to be different. And, what race you're considered is more of a political thing than necessarily a genetic thing. Kind of the biggest two signifiers, I guess, are people, Italians didn't used to be white, the Irish didn't used to be white, they slowly got integrated. And then, of course, the kind of the one drop rule. If you're a little bit African American, you're fully African American in the eyes of many, which is, problematic, but it is a reflection of our culture. Um, and of course, libraries are always changing, so trying to figure out, the perfect collection, trying to have the perfect collection for your individual library is never going to happen, but it's a worthy goal to push towards. Talk a little bit more about own voices here. It's kind of a co-opted marketing term now, which is actually not actually really a bad thing, because at least it means that they care that this book features an African American character and was written by an African American author. Um, but it is a really useful, kind of box to have checked in the diversity audit to make sure that you not only have African American main characters, but you are actually having some of them written by African American writers. Now, when you're going through, it's not really feasible to do in an audit, but when you're ordering books, when you're thinking about what books to bring to your library, you want to make sure you're providing a complete picture. There's a lot of traps that you can fall into. You can't just go through and order every book about slavery and think you've got the African American section covered, because they're not a monolith. They're not one issue readers. You want to go through and you make sure that they're kind of avoiding some of the more problematic tropes, and that your Jewish characters are not all about the Holocaust. Latinx characters are not always just dealing with immigration issues, that they have books where they get to be going on adventures, romance, going into space, whatever various characters that your white characters are going to do. Every other race deserves to get to see themselves doing those same things, and that can be a little bit of an issue trying to keep up with that. But I think it's just really important that you don't fall into ordering the same types of books with the same races in mind. And even if you're just coming down to just sports, there's often libraries have an issue where they have lots of nonfiction books featuring African Americans, but very few fiction books featuring African American characters in sports. So there's a lot to look out for. There's a lot of traps to fall into. So just kind of being cognizant of them and making sure that when books are being ordered, that they're not always the same base stories and about the same issues. Right, so luckily publishing trends are changing and there are becoming more options, which makes it easier to increase the diversity in your books. If you go back and you start doing an audit now and you find that you're around 10 or 11 or 12% non, people of color, then that's just kind of reflective of what was created for most of our, the recent lifetime. Up until 2015, it really was just sitting around 10% every single year, which is not reflective of, the diversity in our country. And especially when you're looking at even in 2017 when they reached 31% people of color and Native people, which is 3 times as many. Only a quarter of those books that were written about them were written by Black, Latino, or Native authors, which means that the other 24% were either written by Asian authors or white authors. And I'm going to put my money on the fact that most of them were probably written by white authors, or at least a huge percentage of them, which isn't inherently bad, but it does say that it's still, you're not getting enough books written by and for African Americans, Latinx, natives, um, and ordering them and promoting them is really the way to get the publishing industry to help you by producing more and more of them. I've included a few links of where you can find diverse literature, but there's many, many more on the internet. It's not too hard to find these days. There's a lot of websites that are promoting it, including the publishing industry. Here we got a list of references that, some of the things I'd read when doing this and things that I included, including the diversity audit, the Lee and Low books infographic, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison infographic, as well as a nice piece on, the windows and mirrors and sliding glass doors. That's definitely worth reading.